Hi, David Pakman. Alzael here. Patriarchal member 149775518. Token Division. So, I finally got around to watching Pakman's video about his personal views on Gamergate, and, look, I'm going to be honest here, just so that you know where I'm coming from. I've never really cared for Pakman as a journalist. I really don't think he's very good at it, and I've been bitched at among other Gamergate people for pointing this out about him. I've even been accused of being a shill for it, which is actually rather funny given the total sum of the things I've written and put into video, but never mind that. My point is that while I have nothing against him personally, aside from his ideology, I'm also not a fan of his and his work either. I find his coverage of Gamergate to be rather fair, but almost suspiciously lackluster. Now, I didn't watch his video when he first put it out because, well, quite frankly, I already knew most of what he was going to say. I was already well aware that he was more or less in the same camp as the feminist/social justice crowd ideologically. He was just one of the ones more willing to hear other sides, so I could predict most of his video as soon as I heard he was going to put it out. That being said, there was actually less in there than I thought he would produce. He only really had about 3 points, which he stretched out to 15 minutes of video, but I want to address some of the basic problems with what he was saying, which might also give a better indication into why I have a rather, let's say, lukewarm opinion of his work. Though, in fairness to the man, he is better than most in his line of work. Of course, as Gamergate has showed us, the bar isn't really set very high for the most part.
Sexism, racism, xenophobia, transphobia, homophobia, etc. within the video game industry. Do I think that these are issues within the gaming industry? Of course, of course. If you do the amount of research we've done into everything that's been written from both sides about under the general umbrella of Gamergate, of course there is misogyny and there's sexism and there is a contingent of people who are talking as if the most important thing is journalistic ethics, but really they're hiding behind this meme of journalistic ethics as the #1 concern in order to slut shame, in order to criticize women for their personal sex lives, in order to make personal attacks and ad hominems. Of course that's going on. Is it the only thing going on? No, of course it isn't. But that is absolutely happening. Now,
so, people are hiding behind journalistic ethics in order to criticize women for their sex lives, in order to slut shame. Whenever I hear someone use the term slut shame, it always kind of causes me to just twitch a little. And I find it rather odd that Pakman mentioned ad hominems when that's pretty much all that terms like slut shaming and misogyny are really used for. In fact, he just did it. I remember, in fact, last week that he was talking to Dave Rubin, and they were discussing Bill Maher, and how anytime he criticizes Islam, a bunch of leftist progressives scream about racism, and treat his criticism as though he hates all brown people, to the point that it's really a meaningless claim because they mean it so vaguely and drag it out over everything. Apparently self-awareness is not one of Mr. Pakman's greater gifts. Mr. Pakman, what you are talking about is not slut-shaming. No one was shaming anyone about their sexual history. No one gave a damn about how many men she was sleeping with. It was who she slept with that was the problem. Such as when a teacher sleeps with his or her student. The problem is not that the teacher was just horny and wanted to get their freak on. The problem is who they wanted to get their freak on with. If a journalist who covers an industry has sexual relations with someone in that industry who they may or may not choose to cover or have to cover in the future, that is an ethical violation. We call it a conflict of interest, and you should not need this explained to you. Relationships cloud judgment, they allow one to be easily manipulated by the partner, etc. Not to mention that we were being asked to blanketly assume that all of her claims about harassment and death threats and such were true. So it is entirely valid to point out that she has a history of being in a monogamous relationship and cheating on her partner. It goes to show her credibility, at her word, and why we should not take her at her word, especially since, by her own standards that she has publicly said, she essentially raped her boyfriend. She herself said that to cheat on your partner is exactly like rape. So this tells us already what her ethical standards are. Pretending that this is not an ethical issue is not only disingenuous and misleading, it's also dishonest. But that's not what started Gamergate, and it's not the real issue. What started Gamergate was the censorship, which I noticed very glaringly that you didn't address. In fact, I could be wrong, but I don't think you've ever tried to address it. It was when the gaming journalists tried to censor any discussion of it en masse, under the guise of preventing slut-shaming and misogyny, that the whole issue of ethics started to really come up. But I'll get to that later. Now that I think about it, given your personal stated stance on always allowing everyone to have their say, regardless of the position they take, I'm rather surprised that you haven't really gone out of your way to mention all of the censorship going on from the other side. You have mentioned the censorship from the mainstream media every so often, but I don't think I've really heard you dig into the censorship and blocking of the anti-Gamergate side. Especially since, you claim to have, done all this research and seen all this stuff. I could be wrong, though. There are one or two of the interviews you've done on Gamergate that I haven't watched. The second point that I want to bring up is the claim about the sexism and misogyny in games, or rather on both sides. Now, I'm not going to argue whether the other side is sexist and misogynist. They can argue it themselves, and I've made my opinions very clear before. But your claims of games having sexism and misogyny in them, or there being misogyny in Gamergate, is, of course, one that I hear all the time from those of you who try to call yourselves progressives. And I will ask you the same question that I always ask people like you. What misogyny? Where? Now, I always ask this, and I never get an answer. You yourself are suspiciously silent on the matter as well. All you say is, well, you can look up the stuff for yourself and you'll see what I mean, which is a spectacularly non-committal comment. Well, I've been a gamer for all of 32 years of my life. I've been paying attention to Gamergate since before it was named Gamergate, and I haven't seen any of this misogyny you speak of. I see claims of it all the time. I see claims of sexism and misogyny all the time, just like I see it all the time from feminists and progressives and social justice warriors. What I don't see, and I never see, are the examples and the reasoning to back it up. You see, to say that something is misogynistic is to say that it demonstrates a hatred or dislike of women, all women, at least if you're using the normal human definition of the word. Now, feminists, social justice warriors, progressives, yada yada yada, like to do this little trick where they use the word to apply to anything said negative to or about a woman ever. And they do this for the obvious reason that it makes a very easy shaming tactic, and it's a good way to entirely demonize your audience by saying, oh look, they said that they hate all women, even though they never said anything about all women. In fact, this is, I will note again, the same thing that you were previously calling other progressives out for in regards to race, taking the word racism and expanding it to include so much that it is meaningless to even use the word, then accusing anyone who does something you don't like a racist. This is exactly what feminists and other social justice warriors do with words like misogynist or sexist, and it seems from everything that you have provided what you are doing now. If I'm wrong, then actually be the first to present something real to me that demonstrates this, but history and experience makes me fairly certain that I'm correct, in which case, shame on you. Now, it may not be possible to count exactly which side did the most harassing, although I would argue that we can certainly get a pretty good idea of that, but never mind that for now. let's say I agree with that we can't really know. What we can know for certain, though, is what each side actually did about it. Gamergate formed a harassment patrol to report in detail any harassment received by anyone, regardless of which side they were on. They asked the FBI to look into the death threat claims of people like Anita, and one Gamergater even found out who was doing it, although Anita and Wu and them never did anything about it. But they even raised money for an anti-bullying charity. They acted in every way responsibly for trying to stop the harassment and doxing, even though none of it was linked to them, and they did it for both sides. What did the other side do? They whined and complained about the harassment, playing the victim game when it happened to them, and openly encouraged it when it happened to others. But you don't seem to care about that in your analysis, do you, David? Now, lastly, and the biggest thing that I take issue with, is your fallacious statement about how there are bigger things to deal with.
Issues that I cover. Is ethics in video game reviews the number one issue? No, it's not. And when I think about water shortages in California and in different parts of the world and possible wars over water resources, when I think about foreign policy and war and what's going on with ISIS and what's going on with American imperialism and all of these issues, that's more important to me than journalistic ethics with regard to video games. Climate change, education. We have religious nuts rewriting textbooks in Texas to do revisionist history with a religious worldview. That, to me, is much more important than video game reviews. I will admit that. Money in politics. Money in politics is ruining our democracy, essentially. Princeton study recently assessed that we don't even really have a democracy anymore. We have an oligarchy. That's more important to me than ethics in video game journalism. Space travel. I mean, we're talking...
Now, on the surface, you are entirely correct, but that is not a reason not to care about or to do anything about it. There is always something bigger and more important, but just because Group A has a larger problem than Group B, that does not make it invalid for Group B to fight for their cause. More to the point, that does not mean that one cannot advocate for both groups' problems at the same time. Now, obviously, no one thinks that this is the next 9/11 or the start of a new Cold War, but it is something that affects us and affects our lives, our passions, our goals, and our happiness. So yeah, you're fucking well right that we take it seriously. It is something very important to us. To try and drag out the old, well, there are more important issues, is patently absurd. And I have to wonder if you would appreciate the same reaction in regards to one of the feminist issues that you advocate about. Because you say that you care about women and abortion. Well, I can think of many issues that rank way above that. So you, by extension, should stop talking about abortion while all those other issues exist. Because the other side is complaining about women wearing skimpy skirts, or that there aren't an arbitrarily sufficient number of women running around in Call of Duty, or how BitTorrent is misogynist. I'm writing an article right now about a group of feminists who are complaining that the fashion industry is sexist and misogynist because they don't put pockets on clothes. Feminism is at least 95% complaining about pointless shit, when they're not just making shit up. And you're a feminist, so you should know that. Go tell them how stupid and pointless they are in the things they complain about. And why are you covering it then? If you give so few shits about Gamergate, why waste so much time and effort when you find it so insignificant in the face of everything else that's going on? It doesn't seem to make much sense to me. Now, maybe you realize this or maybe you don't, but this is more than just a matter of a few games journalists and their ethics. This is a larger matter of the media in general. Gaming is a bigger industry than movies at this point, and has a tremendous ability to influence culture. The people on the anti-Gamergate side want to use this to push their ideology, as they do with the media already, which people in Gamergate have seen firsthand in the way that we are covered and treated. Every media outlet always comes out with claims of misogyny, claims of harassment, but never ones that are actually linked to anyone in Gamergate. Meanwhile, there are many incidences of threats, doxing, censorship, harassment that can be directly tied back to people in the gaming industry, especially in gaming journalism. If a normal company or employees acted in the way that these people do, they would have been fired out the door so fast you could hear the sonic boom from sea to shining sea. But they get away with this because of the stranglehold that their friends have on the media. I see about once a day someone new coming to Gamergate or on Kotaku in Action, talking about how they never realized how bad the leftist media could be until they started paying attention to Gamergate. They had always assumed that it was only the right wing that were the raving sociopaths. Gamergate has been showing everyone otherwise. Through Gamergate, more people are seeing what the people who call themselves progressives really are. That the far left is no better or virtuous than the far right, in many ways worse than the far right. The progressives, the social justice warriors, the feminists in the media betray every single principle that they claim to uphold. They are just as fascist and totalitarian as any right-wing nutjob, just as sexist, just as racist. It's the perfect example of horseshoe theory. Anita Sarkeesian is a proven con artist, caught in lie after lie after lie, and she can still be held up not just by the games media, but by the media itself as an ambassador and authority on games and gaming, when she couldn't even name 3 games that were sexist when asked on TV. She can censor, block comments, not respond to any criticisms, and she's the gaming sweetheart of the left, playing the damsel in distress in the face of all of this misogyny that she receives, while the white knights circle their horses around her. And any criticism against her is not because she's a liar or a con artist, no, it's because she's a woman, and gaming is supposedly a boys' club, if you ignore all the women in it, and they're all misogynists. What does it say about the status of the media when across the board they can sit there and flat out lie to the people that they are reporting to, then point fingers at Fox News and have the balls to cry about their bias and their dishonesty? If we can't at the very least fix this problem in a small area like gaming journalism, then we might as well just kill our society right now and get it over with, because they're killing us much slower. What's unique about Gamergate is that this is the first time they've encountered a group that can't be shouted down or bullied into submission. Gamers have shown that they're immune to the cries of misogynists or the claims of sexism. When James Taranto spoke about the ridiculousness of considering it rape by the man if both parties are drunk, he got shouted down and branded a misogynist who hates women by the media. We are seeing devs come out from hiding, who said they were afraid to speak up against these people because of the repercussions. We're seeing journalists banned from Twitter and silenced. We're seeing rampant censorship of Gamergate, not just in gaming media, but in all media. But this is the first time there's been a group that's really pushed back at them, that won't be cowed by these false claims. That's why this is really important, because this is the first chance so far to establish ethical journalism, not just in gaming, but to show mainstream journalists that they are beholden to the people that they are supposed to serve. And, most importantly, we're winning. Not just winning, outlasting. And here's the big thing. We're winning without censoring the opposition. We're winning without being unwilling to have a dialogue with opposing views. We're winning without demanding that everyone march in lockstep with a certain type of dogma. We're winning while giving to charities, policing people harassing both sides. We're winning without stooping to their level. You're right, this is on the surface just a group of gaming jerk-offs terrassing around the internet. You're right that it is a relatively small thing, but it's a small thing that's one part of a much larger picture. It's become a battle that's a part of a larger war. This battle is about ethics in journalism. There'll be another battle over something else some other time for sure with these people. But this is the battle that's here now. Gamers didn't ask for this, but we got it, and so we're going to do what we always do. Play the game to win. And that's all for me. I'm out. Have yourselves a good evening.